Think back to how you learned a language in school. For most of us, it was probably a lot of separate pieces, right? Vocabulary lists over here, grammar drills over there. But does that really get you ready for a real live conversation? Today, we're going to dive into a totally different way of thinking about it, the integrated skill approach.
So let me just start by asking you this, and it really gets to the heart of everything we're talking about. Is language a subject you learn, like history with facts and dates to memorize from a textbook? Or is it a skill you use, a tool for connecting with people? Because how you answer that question, well, it changes everything. All right, so before we can start weaving things together, we've got to understand the threads. Let's first get on the same page about what a skill even is when it comes to learning a language. We're going to break down the fundamentals. See, a skill isn't just about knowing a bunch of words or memorizing grammar rules. It's this active, dynamic ability to take in language, figure out what it actually means, and then, and this is the important part, produce your own language to communicate something back. It's that whole cycle: process, interpret, and produce. Now, traditionally, language teaching has broken all this down into 4 main pillars, the macro skills. You've got listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And for a long, long time, the go-to method was to teach these things separately. You do a listening exercise, then a grammar worksheet, then maybe a writing assignment. And on the surface, it kind of makes sense. It's way easier to plan a lesson and grade a test when everything's in its own neat little box. And what's really cool is how we can group these skills. Think about it. Listening and reading are what we call receptive skills. You're taking information in. You're receiving it. But speaking and writing, those are productive skills. You're the one creating the language, putting it out into the world. And understanding that difference, that input versus output, is absolutely key. But here's the reality check. In real life, do you ever just listen to someone without already thinking about how you're going to reply? Or read an article without it sparking ideas for something you might want to say or write later? Of course not. Real communication is messy, it's dynamic, it's all interconnected. So treating these skills like separate subjects, well, it just misses the whole point. This brings us to what I think is a perfect metaphor for this better approach: the tapestry. Just imagine each language skill, listening, speaking, even vocabulary and grammar, as a single strand of thread. On its own, a thread is, well, it's just a thread. But when you start weaving them all together, they create something strong, beautiful, and complete. A whole picture. And hey, don't just take my word for it. This idea is backed up. As the researcher Rebecca Oxford put it so well, the best, most authentic communication happens when these skills aren't just taught near each other, but are actively interwoven right into the lesson itself. So what does integration really look like? It's not just a random mix of activities. It's about creating a smart sequence where one skill directly supports the next. For instance, the receptive skill of reading a news article, that's your input, provides the knowledge and vocabulary you need for the productive skill of debating that article's topic, that's your output. It's all tied together by a single theme, which makes it feel like real, authentic communication. Okay, so this all sounds great as a big idea, but how does it actually work in a real classroom? What does it look like when the rubber meets the road? Let's check out the practical models that teachers actually use to make this happen. Generally, there are 2 main paths teachers take. On one hand, you've got task-based instruction, or TBI. That's where the whole point of the lesson is to complete a real-world task, like, say, planning a group trip. Then there's content-based instruction, or CBI, which I think is fascinating. With CBI, you learn the language through another subject. You're not just studying English, you're studying biology in English. Now, both of those paths are really effective, but we're going to zoom in on content-based instruction for a minute. And specifically, we're going to look at a super powerful, really structured framework for doing it right. It's called the SIOP model. SIOP. It stands for Sheltered Instruction Observation Protocol. Yeah, it's a mouthful, I know. But just think of it as a complete blueprint for teachers. It's this research-based system that gives them a guide for making academic content like science or social studies totally understandable for language learners while building their language skills at the very same time. So, what's inside this blueprint? Well, at its heart, the SIOP model is built on these 8 key components. You can almost think of them as a checklist for teachers to make sure every single part of the lesson is designed to be effective and truly integrated. It covers everything from the moment you start planning to how you check for understanding at the end. And here's where you see the magic. It's not just a list of 8 things. It's a cycle, a complete learning loop. It all starts with really careful lesson preparation. From there, you connect new ideas by building background on what students already know. Then you provide comprehensible input, making sure the new stuff is actually understandable. You explicitly teach learning strategies, get students to interact with each other, and then give them a chance to practice and apply what they've learned. All of this is wrapped up in great lesson delivery and followed by review and assessment to make sure it all sticks. It's the whole shebang.
So why go through all this trouble? Why does this big shift away from isolated drills toward integrated communication really matter? For both teachers and students, the payoff is huge. Well, for starters, when you learn this way, you're hearing and using language as it's actually spoken in the real world, not some simplified textbook version. Language becomes a genuine tool for interacting and getting things done. And honestly, because you're learning about cool topics, not just grammar rules, it's way more motivating. You're not just learning a language, you're using language to learn about the world. At the end of the day, it really just boils down to this. The old way can sometimes feel like you're in a lab, dissecting a language, taking it apart piece by piece until it's not really alive anymore. This integrated approach, it's about putting it all back together and actually using it to communicate, to learn, and to connect with other people. And that really just leaves us with one final thought to chew on. In our everyday lives, we never use just one language skill in isolation. We're listening, thinking, and speaking all in the span of a few seconds. So if we use language as a whole, completely interconnected system, doesn't it just make perfect sense that we should be learning it that way too?